Wokefishing is something that's been around for a few years now. However, this article was silently slipped across my Twitter feed recently, and I figured I should talk about it, if only because the idea is just so goofy. The Meaning of Wokefishing in Dating 2024, Problematic Trend or Trout by Amelia Jones. So to start off with a bit of irony, this site, matched.co.uk, it's not a real site. It's preying on people who are trying to find the UK version of the dating website, Match. But this is entirely AI generated. The articles, the images, all AI. Well, mostly AI. This Amelia Jones person is obviously not real, but her writing reads like it's mostly ChatGPT, with a dash of Indian immigrant who has only a basic grasp of the English language thrown in. Whatever the explanation is, I cannot for the life of me determine what problematic trend or trout actually means. The earliest mention of wokefishing that I've been able to find was this Vice article from 2020. Have you been wokefished while dating? Here's how to tell. The author describes how she decided to go vegan at 17, and as a result, her then boyfriend went mask off about how she was turning into an annoying vegan feminist, which killed the relationship. She wrote, "Wokefishing is when people masquerade as holding progressive political views to ensnare potential partners. A wokefish may at first present themselves as a protest-attending, sex-positive, anti-racist, intersectional feminist who drinks ethically sourced oat milk and has read the back catalog of Audre Lorde twice, but in reality, they don't give a shit. Anyone with a brain can see what's going on here. It's actually a pretty common story. Imagine a pious, wholesome, church-going girl. A guy shows up and wants some of that, so he pretends to be a good Christian man. He sweeps her off her feet, he gets what he wants from her, and then he moves on. Wokefishing is that, except for woke girls instead of religious girls. Guys superficially taking up the morality of the girls that they're interested in order to get the girl to be interested back is a trick as old as time. And the leftist variant of the story is at least as old as the 1980s, as Obama described in his autobiography how he read Marx to try and get in bed with the cute alt-bisexual chicks in his dorm while he was at college. To trace the term wokefishing, we have to go down a rabbit hole. In 1913, Henry Nevinson wrote a collection of essays titled Essays in Rebellion, which is part history, part political theory. One of the essays in the book is titled The Catfish, where Nevinson noted that in their natural environment, catfish kept codfish healthy and active as one of their enemies. He compared this behavior as being similar to the stimulating effect that rebellion has on society, being violent and energetic, but ultimately playing a role in the fitness of ideas and institutions. There's an evangelical preacher from Texas named Charles Swindoll, who wrote a religious book in 1988 called Come Before Winter and Share My Hope. Listen, I know I read a lot of books for this channel, but there is no fucking way I'm gonna buy this one. An article titled God's Catfish, analyzing the relevant parts of Swindoll's book, was published in a different evangelical publication, this time a newspaper, in 1992. Apparently, Swindoll had read Nevinson's catfish essay, and he expanded on the original idea. Codfish were apparently in style all across America, but the shippers of the fish discovered a problem. Freezing cod takes away much of their flavor, while shipping cod alive in salt water makes them lethargic and mushy. The solution was to ship the cod in a giant saltwater tank with a few catfish thrown into the mix. As a result, the catfish kept the cod active and healthy until they arrived at their destination. Swindoll's point was that we're also in tanks, and sometimes God will put catfish in our tanks to chase us around. Not to destroy us, but to keep us healthy, alert, and on the move. Yeah, he basically just used the story as a religious metaphor. It remained relatively obscure until it was repeated in the 2010 film Catfish. Catfish is a documentary about the online friendships of the director's younger brother. Without getting into too much detail, he met an attractive woman his age on Facebook back in the late 2000s and started an online relationship. The details given to him by the woman and her family members online began to not add up, so he decided to take an impromptu road trip to go meet her. When he arrived there in person, the mother of the woman was surprised to see him, but eventually welcomed him in. After several conversations with her and other family members, the lie eventually unraveled. The daughter never existed. He had been talking with the mother the entire time, and all of the excuses meant to be roadblocks in the way of his discovering the truth, like claims of cancer or checking into rehab, they were all fake. The husband of the mother woman, when asked by the catfished young man why his wife would do this to him, he repeated Swindoll's anecdote about the cod and the catfish. In his view, his wife's a catfish. She keeps everyone in their lives alert, active, and always thinking. The reasoning the husband gives for her tendency to act like a catfish is because it keeps everyone's life a little bit more interesting. It's from this monologue at the end of the documentary that we get the modern term catfishing, when somebody pretends to be somebody else online for a benefit. This isn't the same as simply being anonymous. You have to actually craft a completely alternate reality, a different person who has relationships with other people, both real and fake, and then step into that role while you're online. If you were active on the internet in the 90s and the early 2000s, one of the original internet rules was that girls didn't exist online. Every single girl was either a guy trying to get money out of you or playing some weird fetish game, or alternatively was a police officer trying to trap you somehow. And you know, there's probably some truth to that. While I do know a couple of legitimate girls who used the internet back in the day, yeah, 9 times out of 10 it was just a dude. So, wokefishing is catfishing. But instead of men pretending to be women online to get some benefit from other men, now it's men pretending to be politically left-leaning in order to attract the shapely hipster art hoe who will immediately give you sloppy toppy if you tell her you donated to Black Lives Matter. Going all the way back to that Vice article, we can see how this plays out in real time. Crises such as the tragic murder of George Floyd and the coronavirus pandemic have thrown societal injustices into even sharper relief over the past few months. This was published in 2020, remember? And as a result, there's been much greater emphasis on individual agency when it comes to the urgent dismantling of oppressive systems. It's no surprise that singles are now consciously choosing partners who are on the same wavelength as them, just as it's no surprise that others are adapting to circumvent this. This really is that Christian Girl example repackaged for the modern era. They have their beliefs, they have their saints, their holy events. They have a preferred set of morals that their partners must also entirely be on board with. And if they lie about it, it's akin to cheating. And you know what? Fair enough. It's good that people have standards. It's just always going to be funny to me that those who think everything from the past is problematic are nonetheless trying to rediscover approximations of older ways of behaving when it comes to their romantic life, because it turns out that they actually had some utility. Like, check out one of the testimonials from the article. After being in a relationship with her ex for a year, Zara realized that some of his views seemed really off, in a way that they hadn't to begin with. Initially, he seemed very philosophical, artistic, and well-read. He was passionate about the environment, and staunchly opposed to the likes of Jordan Peterson. However, he would want to debate every argument, and play devil's advocate the whole time. Based. He didn't accept that some things are fundamental to people's identity, and they were not up for questioning. Zara explained the moments when his true colors began to show. Once he tried arguing with my queer best friend that straight people were as oppressed as gay people. I found the incessant need to debate exhausting and upsetting, and he never acknowledged his own privilege. He never said, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." Okay, you guys weren't compatible. That's completely fine, happens all the time. But writing about this like it's some big new social issue that needs addressing is kind of retarded. Here's a more recent article from Forbes, 2023. 3 dead giveaways are dealing with a woke fisher. Okay, what are the 3 ways? Arm us with the knowledge. 1. They seem to agree with you on every aspect of every issue you're passionate about. Hold on a minute, the last person said the guy argued with her too much. Now if you don't argue enough, you're also a woke fisher? You just can't win. You know, considering how hard progressives purity test everyone, I am not surprised that these things would end up being contradictory. 2. They seem to only have a superficial understanding of the issues they claim to care about. To be honest though, that is most progressive people. In fact, look at the example provided. They may only engage in superficial activism, such as posting about issues on social media or attending protests, without actively participating in social justice efforts or contributing to meaningful change. That is almost all of the progs out there. All they do is post online about capitalism or the patriarchy or whatever, but none of them ever actually do anything in real life. 3. They're obsessed with their social media presence, and they're inconsistent with their opinions. Okay, this is just a continuation of what I said in 2. But here's the interesting thing. Our guy says, a 2023 study explains that with virtue signaling becoming a common way to communicate our goodness to others, it is increasingly difficult to differentiate people who genuinely share our values and those who are only interested in appearing that way to establish social proof. Yes, this is what happens when a subcultural movement or community becomes the dominant culture. Most people are not going to be diehard believers. They latch onto what's popular because it's popular. They do what's normal because it's normal. And progressives should know this. It's why they talk about normalizing things that are not currently normal all the time, because there is power in staking out what the majority of people consider to be the normal position. There's a book I read a few years back that goes over this. I think it was The Dictator's Handbook, but I'm not exactly sure. The idea basically is, you have a set of beliefs controlled by a core group of people who not only propagate the beliefs, but they also create the content of the beliefs. Outside of this group, you have new converts to the beliefs. These are the zealots, the true believers. They don't control the content of the beliefs, but they devote themselves to their spread and implementation. Outside of this group, you have the opportunists. These are the people who notice that a new set of beliefs is growing, and they attach themselves to the movement not because they're true believers, but because they want the benefits of being a part of the group. And then on the outside of that, you have the normies. Once a set of beliefs becomes cultural mainstream, the normies then attach themselves to it, not out of any true belief or out of any self-interest, but because it's the normal thing to do. They do it without thinking because everyone around them does it. As progressive policies and morality became normalized in our culture, wokefishing was bound to happen because the opportunists, and to a lesser extent the normies, were turning towards progressivism. As long as there is a social benefit to being a progressive, there will always be some people who pretend to be progressive in order to reap that benefit, just like everyone across history who pretended to be a member of a religion or a political party, despite not really caring all that much about the cause. Another part of this conversation is the trend that you may have noticed of male feminists or progressives commonly having skeletons in their closet. Now, to be fair, I don't know of any data that shows male leftists being more likely to commit some sort of sexual offense compared to other groups. But that is certainly how it feels sometimes when you pop onto social media and see story after story of these men who claim to be committed progressives, who have allegations come out about them. In fact, that stereotype, combined with the egregious misuse of the MeToo hashtag, is what caused people like, for example, Chuka Conroy or Mike Zymont to be slapped with these ridiculous charges and have their reputations destroyed over what basically amounted to nothing. Both of these guys didn't really talk much about politics, but they were casually progressive light, in an overwhelmingly progressive environment. And so there was this aggressive overreaction of self-policing whenever there was even a whiff of impropriety, even if nothing was actually wrong, and it was enough to destroy these guys' careers. However, the stereotype of the male progressive who is a secret sexual harasser is still a stereotype for a reason. It's a more extreme version of wokefishing, where a wokefisher might disguise himself as a progressive to get progressive girls to have sex with him. These people disguise themselves as progressives in order to gain opportunities to pressure girls into sex, or sometimes just to outright rape them, or sometimes they're actually grooming kids. There's examples of that too. Sometimes, though, it's just more mundane things, like progressive guys standing up for women in public, and then in private, expecting that behavior to grant them access to the women they defended. This is all really shitty behavior, but it's also what you would expect to happen as a new paradigm becomes dominant. Some of the new followers of any movement will be there for self-serving reasons. Some use it for sex, like the guys I just pulled up. Some use it to get money, like the fat BLM chick who stole millions. Some use it for personal prestige, like down the road they can put on their resume that they ran a foundation that was related to the movement or something. The point is that wokefishing, and these other more extreme related ideas, isn't something that is endemic to progressivism. It's endemic to all forms of human organization. There will always be hanger-ons who use a movement for their own ends. And the strength of any movement is determined not only by how accurately it can gatekeep those people out of it, but how many of those people the movement can tolerate if they slip through the cracks. This kind of sounds like an ideological form of the free rider problem. In economics, the free rider problem specifically refers to people who benefit from public goods or some other common pool of resources without contributing to that system. The commonly used example is the person who doesn't pay taxes but still uses a nationalized healthcare service where the state pays for his care. He's withdrawing from the system without actually paying back into it. The free rider problem was initially conceived as a problem regarding the long-term viability of public resources, originally conceived a long time ago with the phrase "the tragedy of the commons." The original example here was of an unclaimed field, where all the surrounding shepherds allowed their flock to graze unrestricted. Eventually the field was destroyed. All of the grass was consumed with nothing left to grow back, because each individual shepherd didn't really care about maintaining the field, since it wasn't their land, so it's not their responsibility. The tragedy of the commons can be seen everywhere, from pollution in the air to pollution in the ocean, to the state of public goods in communist countries, to the state of public goods in our own countries sometimes. Free riders see no reason to maintain the system they're withdrawing from, they simply withdraw and move on. And although humans are a competitive species, at least one study has shown that the presence of a free rider within a system, once discovered, lowers cooperation and public trust, and encourages other people to also become free riders. This does make sense. If you can't trust that your community is going to take care of the common pool of resources for the long term, the next best thing is to get as much of it as you can for yourself before it runs out. I'll probably do a separate video specifically on the free rider problem, since it is more complex than just this. But this idea has been applied to many other situations, not just a public pool of resources. In terms of social groups, the normies are passive free riders. They gain benefits, but they don't really cheat the system. Meanwhile, the opportunists are active free riders. They engage with the system with the specific purpose of helping themselves to its benefits, without any intention of giving back. So, going all the way back to wokefishing, exploitative men who pretend to be progressive in order to get into women's pants, or even legitimately progressive men who talk themselves into believing that they're owed sexual contact with progressive women, these are the free riders of the progressive movement. Progressivism has a moral code, and these men are appearing to follow that code without actually following it in order to reap some reward. It's scummy, sure, but it's a problem that you can't really solve without, being a good judge of character, or being alert about who you let into your life, that sort of thing. Like I said, it's not endemic to progressivism as an ideology. However, I do think that progressivism is uniquely weak to it, for a couple of reasons. One, progressives tend to be blind to the free rider problem. When it's economics, progressives ignore the need to keep social services solvent by simply saying, tax the rich more, and what do you care what other people do? It's none of your business. They operate as if there is an infinite supply of resources for the masses to consume without end, while treating requests that the masses curb their consumption habits as problematic. This mindset translates over when we talk about the free rider problem in other contexts. For example, if a progressive individual complains that all the people they fuck end up leaving them, they tend to become quite angry when you propose the obvious solution of stop having so much promiscuous sex, because it's suggesting that their consumption habits are contributing to the degradation of the social system they're engaging with. By the way, this was one big reason the leftoids hated my video on HIV from like a month ago. 2. Progressives tend to reject all inherited knowledge outright, as old, outdated, no longer applicable for the modern world. And to be fair, sometimes this is true. No tradition remains relevant forever. However, I said back at the start of the video that a lot of the zealous overreactions to wokefishing, or those Me Too accusations in the middle of the video, that stuff is all an attempt by progressives to rediscover some sort of sexual moral code that doesn't rely solely on consent. Consent is important, obviously, but when you wake up the next day after a bad sexual experience that was nonetheless consensual, simply appealing to a consent-based morality can't tell you why you feel bad about it. You consented, the other person consented. What's the problem? I think this is why the worst of the progressives tend to play this shell game with consent. They retroactively revoke consent, or they lie and claim consent never existed, or they try to carve out these weird exceptions where they clearly did give consent, but it didn't actually count because of the power imbalance or whatever. Each of these instances happens because there's obviously a moral concern here beyond mere consent. But if your moral reasoning only contains within it consent-based language, then you have no way to describe your moral concerns without stretching the definition of consent beyond usability. However, there are obviously moral concerns here beyond mere consent. For example, if I consent to casual random sex with somebody I don't know, and I end up catching an STD, that's pretty bad. There's probably a moral conversation to be had there about my personal conduct, how I treat my body and other people's bodies, what this behavior says about my character. But if the only morality that exists is consent-based morality, then all of that is off the table. The only thing that I can complain about is if my partner infected me with that STD, knowingly or not. If they didn't know, then they didn't consent, which makes both of us victims. Victims of what exactly? Well, the answer to that is our own bad behavior. But if our only moral understanding is consent-based, there's no way for us to judge our behavior because we both consented. Traditional sexual morality relies on something more than just consent to determine whether or not a sexual behavior is virtuous. Sometimes that old morality is stifling and oppressive, and fair enough. But there's clearly something else in there that is also good and necessary, because the constant policing of otherwise consensual behavior by progressives shows that even they know something is missing, and they're desperately trying to rediscover it through a crude trial and error process, which now plays out on social media in public and leads to people's lives being destroyed, even if they did nothing wrong. So, wokefishing. It's bad, but it's not new. And progressives are finding themselves dealing with this problem specifically because, in their crusade to discard anything old or outdated, they threw away all the tools that we used to use to police this kind of behavior. And without them, they're now left grasping in the dark, trying to rediscover what the rest of us already figured out a long time ago.